In these situations, there are two things that you need: quick access to money and sufficient money so you can avoid getting into debt. In this video, I will discuss what an emergency fund is and why you need it, how much money to have in your emergency fund, what are the different financial instruments that you can use for building your emergency fund, and who really needs an emergency fund. An emergency fund is something which can help you get the quick access to money and also avoid getting into debt whenever you have an emergency. In a way, it helps you buy time so that you can get back in control of your life and finances. I want to take a scientific approach to arrive at what should be the size of your emergency fund and not just pull a number out of thin air. One of the key reasons for having an emergency fund is to tackle a job loss or loss of income situation. Here's a chart which gives the average number of weeks of unemployment in the 30-year period from 1990 to 2020. The average duration of unemployment works out to 21 weeks or 5 months. So your emergency fund should have at least 5 months of living expenses. Assuming you're going to cut back on some of the discretionary expenses during such an emergency, you have some cushion built into it, and it might last you a little longer. I don't want to speculate on your spending habits and suggest an amount now. What I'd suggest is that depending on the size of your family, the stage of life you're in, the city you live in, etc., your expenses are going to vary. So be sure to recalibrate the size of your emergency fund at different stages in your life, using 5 months expenses as a rough guideline. But for the benefit of the curious-minded, here's some data on the average spends of families in different states. I'll link it in the description below. Now let's discuss the different instruments you can consider for building your emergency fund. We will look at 6 different instruments, their risk-return characteristics, and some key highlights. Our first category: low-yield accounts, which include savings accounts and money market accounts. These are deposit accounts, and if they are insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, then there is no risk whatsoever. With savings accounts, you typically get 0.01% kind of yields, but it can go up to 0.06%. In fact, that's the national average. And these accounts only need a low minimum balance. With money market accounts, you can stretch the yield up to 0.11% if you have a deposit of over 100K. These are, like I said, low yield categories. So let's look at the next category, which is a medium yield category. It includes high yield savings accounts and certificate of deposits. With high yield savings accounts, in return for sacrificing some of the conveniences you expect from a typical bank, you can get a yield of 0.5% by opening your high yield account with an online only bank. Again, you would have to put up with higher minimum balance and deposit requirements. With certificate of deposits, you commit to keep your money with the bank for a term of 3 months to 5 years and can get a yield of up to 1.3%. But then that's the penalty for early withdrawal. Again, all these 4 deposit account options do have a pretty low yield, which is not going to keep up with inflation, especially in high inflationary environments. Our third category includes high yield assets, such as TIPS and I-bonds. Both these are bonds which are meant to offer returns that are in tune with inflation. So more or less the 7% return which matches with inflation as of early 2022. With TIPS, there is a slight risk that there could be a loss of your original principal. With both these instruments, you have to buy them at Treasury Direct, not with your brokerage such as Fidelity or Ameritrade. When you sell them, you have to sell by transferring the security from Treasury Direct to your brokerage or bank. With I-bonds, there is the additional constraint that you cannot sell for the first year. And if you sell after the first year but within 5 years, you will have to pay an interest penalty. There are a lot of intricacies when it comes to TIPS and I-bonds, but I will discuss that in a separate video on bonds. I would suggest that you keep a portion of your emergency fund in each of the 3 categories that we discussed, based on how you'd like to balance convenience, risk, and return. Note that there's going to be some delay for you to gain access to the funds you kept in your TIPS and I-bonds. This is because you'll have to transfer these securities from Treasury Direct to your bank or brokerage before you could encash them. But if you also put some money into the depository accounts that we spoke about, then you could of course buy time with that. Also, you have your credit card, which is going to give you an extra couple of weeks leeway. I wouldn't suggest keeping your emergency fund tied up in assets such as stocks, cryptos, and other speculative assets, as there is a risk of losing your money. Also, I wouldn't suggest keeping your money in mutual funds or ETFs because in addition to the risk of losing the money, you also incur significant management fees. Before we go to the last section of this video on who really needs to build an emergency fund, here's a quick question for you. Do you think there is some other financial instrument that should be included in this list? If yes, let me know in the comment section below. I would say that all of us should ideally set aside some money for the emergency fund. But if you are in debt, let's say credit card debt or student loan debt, then by all means pay that off first. The average APR for credit card debt is about 19.5%. And at that rate, the debt actually doubles in less than 4 years and it becomes 10 times the original amount in 12 to 13 years. The average APR for student loan debt is 3.73% for undergraduate loans and about 5.5% for graduate loans. Even that is quite high. If you have cleared all your debt and considering investing your savings, then the emergency fund is the first thing you must do. In fact, I would say you could consider it mandatory. If you have been investing for a while and have built your wealth, then the emergency fund is optional, but still a good thing to have. In that case, you can consider putting more of your emergency fund in TIPS and I bonds and consider that as a diversification to your larger portfolio. If you watched the video so far, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel for more such videos. This is Senthil with the Game of Money, discussing investing, business and careers.